Hello, everybody. I'm Hope Lafferty. Thank you for trying my podcast called Hope Lafferty's Existential Crisis. It's a podcast for creativity and other phenomena. But really, it's a podcast for everybody. Because let's face it, who hasn't had an existential crisis in the course of their lives? But maybe I should back up. It is possible that some of you folks haven't had an existential crisis, so you might not even know what I'm talking about. Consider this: if, for one moment, you've ever thought, what am I doing with my life? You're sitting in traffic or in front of the TV. You're at the gym, at work, in class. You just got pulled over. Again, these thoughts cross your mind. These thoughts that fly in the face of the choices you've made or the circumstances you're in. It's doubt. Subjective doubt. It's the thing that separates us from the animals. What am I doing with my life? Or better, who am I? These questions, these thoughts, illuminate the human condition. Other thoughts. When did we start calling them red states versus blue states? Is that like the Red Scare? When did Black Friday become a thing? And what does black mean in that case? Why bone broth? You say to yourself, I must have missed the memo. If anybody knows what a memo is anymore, I must have deleted that email. I must have spaced out. Or you find yourself asking, how come I feel so weird about myself? Like when you're doing an introduction to a podcast. Well, gang, you've entered the downward spiral that I affectionately call an existential crisis. Now, crisis. It implies a short, sharp shock of some sort. And I hate to say it, but in my world, existential crisis is more of an existential chronic, something that has spanned decades and time zones and relationships and career choices. Hope Lafferty's existential crisis is frankly designed to confront the truth, as do all good existential crises, the uncomfortable truth about what it means to be human in the 21st century, or in my case, what it means to be an aging, distractible, sensitive, unapologetic upstart of a Gen X woman in the 21st century. So, welcome to the Seekers podcast. The good news is I have a lot of friends across generations and time zones and relationships and careers that are along for this existential ride with me, so you'll get to hear their perspectives too. My goal through this podcast is to make my subjective doubt, my existential crisis, one that can be shared, not in a self-deprecating rant of negative self-talk, but as a way to step back and consider what it means to be human, ideally with optimism and with an eye toward humor. I mean, look at my name. That stuff is built in. I mentioned that Hope Lafferty's Existential Crisis is a podcast for creativity and other phenomena. Well, now that we've got a bit of a handle on the existential crisis thing, let's tackle the creativity part. I'm a writer. I've been writing recreationally since I was 9, and I've written lots of things. And although I work as a writer and an editor, I've mastered the fine art of not publishing very much in my career, which, if you could guess, is part of my existential crisis, because we all know that if you're not a published writer, you're not really a writer. But I've published some. And I've taught writing and creativity to lots of folks. So the creativity part of this podcast will be recordings of my writing as works of radio theater. My intent in presenting my writing in this form is twofold. First, as pure entertainment. And second, if you consider yourself creative, you can use these recordings to spur your own writing or your own projects. After each recorded piece, I offer a little critique or contextualization to let you, the listener, in on my creative process. And that's part one of the podcast. The second part of the podcast is what I call other phenomena. It's kind of a step up from navel gazing, kind of a garbage can, kind of an accordion structure. I have a social science background, and I've been meditating since I was 18, so I've always found the inner workings of the mind fascinating. If you couldn't guess, I'm a huge fan of self-actualization. It's a big word for just being better. I mean, what are we doing on this earth if we're not trying to be the best person we can be? So I have a few different modules to explore the seeker part of my personality. There's what I call This Week in Existence, which is a recounting of some phenomena or event that recently happened in my life or in my world. Some episodes include The Throwback Machine, where I go into my journal writings and remind myself of something particularly existential that I find myself learning from again. And my favorite segment is when I get to interview the other creative professionals in my life, called You Are Not Alone. In those interviews, I ask 3 questions. What are the circumstances around your birth? What is your earliest memory? And when you think of existential crisis, what comes to mind? These questions fuel a lot of fun and captivating conversations about, again, how we function as humans in the 21st century and how we pursue creative work and meaningful work in the 21st century. I end each podcast with a closing mantra based on the themes of the episode. And it's not some crazy Sanskrit thing that nobody knows the meaning of. It's more of a thought for the week. And of course, I want to hear from you. You've listened this long. I hope that the podcast can provide some insight on your current circumstances or your future circumstances or your creative expression. Subscribe on iTunes. Tune in to the Marfa channel at themarfachannel.com and follow me on Twitter at The Hope Crisis. Thank you so much for listening. I'm so glad to know that you resonate with self-exploration, looking at how life and work and creativity can fuel our humanity. Let's celebrate the human condition and have some frickin' fun for a change. Till next time, look after yourselves.